Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We've got 8 participants.
Break a leg, Jen.
Thanks. You too,
Looking
Ian.
forward to it.
So Carter, hello everyone. I will do the general introduction and then pass it to you.
Okay.
Hey everyone, I recognize some familiar names. Nice to see you all. I'm Lynn Freeman, and for those of you who don't know me, I am president of OFO. I live in Toronto, and I cannot wait to get up to Sault Ste. Marie in person next year. This year it's virtual. So we'll just wait another couple of minutes for people to sign in. Light. 7:04. Yeah, so we might as well get started because we're going to be doing a roundup first. I'm going to pass it on to Carter Dorst, who is a member of the OFO board, diehard committed birder in the Sault area, and is executive director at the Kensington Conservancy. So I think you probably know everything there is to know about birds in Sault Ste. Marie, right, Carter?
Probably not everything, but pretty close.
So this whole festival is Carter's idea, and he's been making it happen. We wanted to do it in person this year for the first time, but I'm sure we'll be in person next year. So I will turn it over to you, Carter, to talk about the birds that people have seen today and the photos that people have taken.
All right, thanks, Lynn. So good evening, everyone. Happy to be here for our third night of the OFO Sault Ste. Marie Birding Festival. To start it off, I want to remind everyone about our auction that is going on right now. There's some fantastic things to be purchased. I'm gonna put a link into the chat right now. So make sure either during this didn't type here. My computer froze. There we go. I
might be able to do it.
There we go. It's sent now. So make sure to check that out not during the presentation. We'll make sure you pay attention, but right now or during the presentation, check out the auction. There's 5 items up for grabs right now. The first one being a book called Being a Bird in North America. The second one is a framed photo of a Cape Petrel donated and taken by local bird and photographer Kirk Zufelt. It's a fantastic photo. I really want to see that one go for a high amount. So make sure you bid on that. Next one is a gift certificate for a birding outing offered by me with my side business, Dorst Birding. It's about half day, so about 4 hours. We'll go out and I'm sure find a lot of birds. Next is a Nikon D3100 camera with a couple different lenses. It's slightly used, but is a good, pretty good camera based on what I've read. And it's a really good deal if you bid on it now. And the last one is a book also donated by Kirk Zufelt, which he co-authored. Photos of seabirds from all around the world. So check that out. The auction is open until 9:30 p.m. this evening, which is when it'll close. So get your bids in before then, and we'll send another reminder before we're done this evening. Next up, we're going to talk about the birds that were found throughout the festival. There's actually a prize for best bird that's been found within the Sault Ste. Marie area over the course of this weekend. So since the start of Friday. So put into the chat if you have any birds that you want to put into consideration for that prize. We've already got some good birds entered. I posted this in the Facebook group as well. And we got some good birds. My entry is Ruddy Turnstone, which is actually my first ones for the Algoma district. olive-sided flycatcher, indigo bunting, red-headed woodpecker. Obviously the day isn't over yet though, so there's a chance for to get out there and go birding. Maybe somebody will find like something like, you know, a screech owl this evening, or I don't know, something. There's still time anyways. So if you want to put into the comments here, if at any time tonight, what your entry for that is, go for it. And also we have a photo contest going on. If you post your photo to social media anywhere with the hashtag SSM Birding Festival, there is also a prize for best photo. So get those in as well by the end of the day. We probably won't announce the prize winners until tomorrow at some point, as the committee will have to go through the entries and pick some winners, but make sure you get your photos submitted. So seeing at this time, there's no entries to discuss right now. I'm going to turn it over to Jen Foote here for the first presentation of this evening. Jen is a professor at Algoma University, and she does a lot of bird research, whether it be white-throated sparrows, chimney swifts, oven birds, which is the topic for her discussion tonight. So I'm going to pass it over to Jen, and she'll take it away from here.
Thanks, Carter. Just going to share my screen here. Okay, well, thank you very much for having me here today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some research I've been doing here in the Algoma region on nocturnal singing by ovenbirds. So before I get started, I just want to take a minute here to talk a little bit about bird singing behavior. So birds sing their songs to defend territories and to attract mates. And while some birds have just a single song type, like the black-capped chickadees, others have a repertoire of multiple songs. And so some of these birds, like the song sparrow, sing songs that seem to be interchangeable in function and may also be multi-purpose, so function in both mate attraction and territory defense. Other birds have song types that are acoustically distinct in some way and may have different functions, like the chestnut-sided warbler. So they use different song types typically to defend their territory and to attract their mates. So birds can vary in the types of songs that they sing and the number of song types that they sing, but also when they sing them. And the variation we can see in the singing behavior of birds can be seasonal, like we see here for the Adelaide's warbler, where song activity peaks during the breeding season here between March and July. Variation may also occur across the day. So we see deal variation. So at dawn, we can see a large peak in vocal activity during the breeding season, but we also do see a peak in morning and at dusk, but it ends a little bit earlier than the dawn chorus and doesn't have quite the intensity of song. Few studies integrate both the daily and seasonal patterns for different song types. So we'll come to how I'm going to try to do that for ovenbirds in just a minute. But for those of you who aren't familiar with the ovenbird, I know many of you being birders will have met the ovenbird. The ovenbird is a warbler that sings two distinct song types. The one you're most familiar with is probably the primary song type. And it seems to be multi-purpose. So it's composed of that single syllable that you can see here, repeated several times. So this image that I show you here is a spectrogram that shows us the time of the bird song and the frequency of that bird song. So we can look at the syllables here and we can see that the same three notes are compose a syllable and they're repeated many times throughout the song. So it's sung at a high rate during the breeding season. The flight song of the ovenbird is much longer and it has many different syllable types, including several primary syllables here in the middle. And it's divided into three segments with an introductory segment before, the primary sequence, and then the terminal sequence. And it sounds like this. So if you're lucky, you may have heard the flight song of the ovenbird when you've been out in the woods. I'll show that it's typically more common at dusk and at night. But we don't know whether this song is multi-purpose and is used to communicate with both males and females, if it's used primarily to communicate with other males or rivals, or primarily with females. The seasonal and daily patterns of the two song types have not been investigated, and we know very little about the syllable composition, how males may share syllables in those songs, and whether there's variation within and among individuals. Oh, nobody can hear the bird song. Sorry about that. Let's go back. I think I can make that work. Let me just try that again. Okay, let's play the ovenbird's primary song first. And then the flight song. Okay, I've lost my chat, so now I can't see that. Okay. Sometimes you can get it to pop up when you have your screen shared, and other times it just won't come. Yes. Okay, so the early work that my students and I did on flight songs, Carrie, Linnea, Mandy, and Laura, we found that the ovenbirds sing this flight song at night. We set out a number of autonomous recorders in the forest, and we detected the song during the nighttime. We also found that the rate of flight song when we deployed the recorders over an entire season was highest mid-season, so they didn't really start to sing the song type until about 2 weeks after arrival. Just give me a second here, I have to clear my throat. Sorry, I'm super allergic to pollen and spend my whole day outside. So they start about 2 weeks after arrival. They don't typically sing them in July. They sing the flight songs on warmer nights with low wind speeds and no precipitation. And interestingly, in the season we looked at it when the moon is new, which means they seem to be intentionally trying to sing this vocalization at night. So based on our early work, we set out to ask 3 questions. Do males use flight songs to interact vocally at night? We wanted to examine the daily or deal and seasonal patterns of their primary and flight songs, and to characterize the composition of the songs. So to answer the first question, we set out a series of 8 song meters. These are autonomous recorders that we can program to record whenever we like. We had them record all night long, covering the territories of about 4 to 6 ovenbirds. So I did this work with my students Hamim and Kristen, and we used a speaker to provide playback of ovenbird flight songs to see how they reacted to hearing it within their territories. So we recorded each area for 3 nights. On nights 1 and 3, we did nothing. And on nights 2, we put our speaker out there at dusk, and it was programmed to record, to play back either an ovenbird or a white-throated sparrow song several hours after sunset, and then a second one an hour later, so the opposite type, a white-throated sparrow or an ovenbird. We chose a white-throated sparrow because they also sing at night in this area. And then we repeated that one more time, separated by 2 hours. And then after each of those recordings, we looked to see what the birds were doing on our autonomous recorders. Okay, so what we found with this study was that the natural pattern of song delivery on those nights where we didn't disturb the birds, the songs of adjacent males were typically separated by 13.3 minutes on average. And only 29 of 425 instances did we have songs sung within 1 minute of each other. So we had no evidence that males were counter singing or interacting. When we looked at the playback, we found that the ovenbirds did not sing more songs in the hour after an ovenbird playback compared to a white-throated sparrow playback, and they didn't sing sooner after the ovenbird playback. So this suggests that males are not using that flight song vocalization at night to interact with other males, but they may be using it to interact with females. To answer the second question, we again put out those automatic recorders at each of these spots here on the Pinder Trail at Hiawatha Highlands that you can see here in this yellow. The recorders look like this, just to give you an actual picture instead of a diagram of them. And so my students Kendria and Megan worked on this project. And what we did is once a week, we recorded for 24 hours from early May through late July. And then we scanned the recordings of 21 males and annotated or put boxes around about 100,000 songs. We then looked to see what the pattern of delivery was of the song type. So we looked at different periods of the day, the dawn chorus beginning at civil twilight and going until sunrise, the morning up until local noon, which we split into 2 halves, the afternoon and the evening from local noon to sunset, which we also split in equal halves, the dusk after sunset until civil twilight, and then the night, that period between twilights that we again split into early night and late night. And so I just want to show you a graph here of the number of primary songs versus date here. So this would be the beginning at May 2nd. This would be July 25th. And we can see that songs decline over the season, but they sing primary songs most often in dawn and in the morning, and less often in the afternoon, evening, and at dusk. If we compare that pattern to what we see for flight songs, we find just the opposite. So song rates are high in the evening and at dusk, as well as at night, and then they're very low in the morning and at dawn. So this suggests that there's some temporal separation in the time periods in which they use these song types. This graph is the same thing, the number of songs versus dates, but instead of showing you time periods, I'm showing you individual males. So we can see that some birds sing much more than other birds, but they all show that sort of seasonal decline. Less variation in flight songs, but we do have some males that sing more flight songs than other males. And then the third thing we were interested in was looking at the structure of those flight songs. So in this study, we had 29 recorders on the Pinder and on the Kinsman Trail. They recorded from 2 hours before sunset until 2 hours after sunrise. We went through and clipped out all the flight songs we found and found 396 songs sung by 23 individuals. My student Nadine and Megan went through and identified every syllable in each song using a consistent naming system across songs and individuals to try to understand the structure of the song. So they found no relationship between syllable sharing and distance between males. So here is the syllable repertoire of the entire population. Here's our map again. And let's just look at a few example syllables here. So for example, if we look at this particular syllable, here's all the locations where it was not found, and then the stars show us where it was found. So there's no clear relationship between the types of syllables and distance. We get the same thing if we look at other syllables. So here's another one. There's all the birds that didn't sing it in red, the birds that did in orange. So we found 40 different syllable types in the population. Each individual had an average of 23.7 syllables. And we found, again, no evidence of local geographic variation in the syllables, which is unlike what we see for some other species that have multiple song types, like say song sparrows, for example. We then looked to see how similar the songs were of individuals that we had multiple samples for compared to other individuals. So here I'm just showing you the spectrograms of one male. We have 10 examples, and you can see that there is some considerable variation within that male in terms of how he composes his songs. If we then look at different males. Now we're looking at 10 different males. And I hope you can kind of appreciate the amount of variation we're seeing here. So what we're seeing is that the songs of different males are more different than the songs of individuals. So that means that the songs are kind of moderately repeatable. Individuals that tend to have shorter songs differ in length from those that tend to have longer, but within those males, there's still some plasticity. So it's not fixed. They don't just have a single flight song that they can sing. And the last thing we were interested in was how the syllables transition between one another. So this is kind of a complicated diagram. Don't worry about the specifics here. Each letter represents one of those syllable types, and the lines represent transitions between them in the song. So thick lines mean that we have lots of transitions between those syllables. Absent lines mean there's none, and thin lines mean it happens very often. So in this case, we have a low probability of transition, and here we were stricter. The lines on the outside show syllables that are repeated. And the real takeaway message here is that, again, we have those two types. We see some transitions that are extremely common, others that never occur, and some syllables that are repeated quite often when they're used within the song, and others that are never repeated, so they're only sung once. So when we take that all together and do kind of a network analysis, we end up with these 5 groupings of syllables with that primary syllable in the middle. The light blue notes are ones that tend to be found in the introductory part of the song. The dark blue tend to be found in the later part, suggesting that we do have kind of distinct introductory, intermediate, primary, and then terminal segments of the song. Which supports that organization proposed by Roslin in the 1980s. So to quickly summarize, we didn't find any evidence that ovenbirds use their nocturnal songs for male-male communication. They didn't show that when we observed them or when we did an experiment. So the flight song may serve another purpose, like announcing their location, and potentially at night advertising for extra pair mates where females may be moving onto the territories of adjacent males in order to copulate with them. And that the flight songs and primary songs do seem to be temporally separated and sung at different periods of the day, but they both decline seasonally in a similar pattern. And we found that flight songs show temporal organization, but are still somewhat plastic. So special thanks to all my students who worked on this project, as well as the institutions that support us, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. That was very good. Lots of good information there about ovenbirds. So I'm not seeing any questions yet, but I'll give it a second here in case any questions come in. Well, great presentation. Well, everyone, lots of congratulations here and thank yous. Do female ovenbirds sing at all?
So that's a good question. And it's not one that's been well documented. I did most of my work with automatic recordings, and we always picked up a consistent song type in each territory of notes, which suggests that there was probably only one bird singing. But I'm paying attention to that now, as this year I'm actually tracking the ovenbirds and starting to follow them, and I'm listening closely for like when a male's singing in a tree and it's clearly a male, do I ever hear like a female singing as well? So I'm on the lookout, but I'm actually not really sure. Most warblers seem that females can sing, but in North America or temperate regions rarely do. So I'm hoping to see some females singing.
Oh, yeah. Do they sing all night?
So they sing one song at a time. Flight songs are pretty much never repeated. They're almost always just once. So an ovenbird might sing between 2 and 5 songs in a night. So they do it throughout the night, but not very often. And then the observation that we see hardly hear them later in the day. And that's because that pattern I showed, we really see that the primary songs are very prevalent early in the day and actually uncommon later in the day, although they do kind of perk up a little bit sometimes in the evening. And I've been hearing flight songs outside my house at night. I just moved and I now have ovenbirds on my own property. And so it's kind of neat to hear them at dusk singing. Thankfully, I don't hear them in the night. I've got good windows.
I've heard them like, just before dark, but I've never really heard them myself at night.
We got the idea for the entire project because one of my students wanted to look at how light influenced the dawn chorus. And so she wanted to measure light levels. We used the lights at Kinsman Park and turned them on all night, but she wanted to look at different distances at different times of night, how light it was deep into the forest. And we were out there at like 2 a.m. and we heard the ovenbirds sing. And we were like, what are they doing? Why are they singing at 2? We should put some recorders out here when we can't be here. And that's how the whole project started.
Is there research on correlation with mating success?
Not yet, because I haven't tried to find their nests yet. That's something I'm going to do in the background this year, but it's so hard
yeah.
to find nests of ground nesters that I am not quite ready to commit to that. I didn't even ask for permission to take blood samples from the birds because I was like, I'm never going to find any nests anyway. So maybe I'll be so skilled that I'll be able to do it next year.
Can you suggest how high the birds fly and if they cover any amount of area?
Well, so the songs are called the flight song, but I actually think they rarely fly while singing them. Because I've seen them sitting in a tree and I've listened to them doing it. Well, I can tell that there's no sound traveling as if they're moving, no kind of like Doppler effect. So I've never actually seen one fly while it's producing one of these vocalizations, though presumably they must sometimes do it. I think actually probably more than 90% of the time they actually sing them while perched.
Interesting. Why are they called ovenbirds?
Because their nest actually looks like a little oven. So they kind of like burrow in underneath the leaf litter and make a little dome, and then they build their nest underneath it. So it looks like one of those Dutch ovens. Which is why they're also so hard to find.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never seen an ovenbird. I haven't gone specifically looking for them before, but I've never stumbled across one either.
I think the only way you do is if you almost step on one and the female juts out underneath your foot. And then you're like, if something brown flies out from under near your foot on the forest floor, you can be pretty much guaranteed one step away and looking this way is probably an ovenbird nest.
Probably, yeah. Do other thrushes sing at night? Well, ovenbird isn't actually a thrush, it's an ovenbird. Or not an ovenbird, it's a warbler, sorry. But thrushes do sing at night. I've heard veeries and hermit thrushes sing at night as well.
Although they don't often. So like in all of our nocturnal studies, they sing later than most and earlier than most, but we've never picked them up singing like between nautical twilight at night.
Right.
And
yeah, I can imagine that the amount of times I've heard them actually sing like in the middle of the night, it's been very like maybe 1 or 2 times, but they definitely do sing late into.
They do.
Such.
Yeah, they're the latest singer at dusk.
Do males tend to sing in a tree above the nest site?
Well, I'm not sure yet because I haven't found a nest, but in most ground nesters, the male tends to stay close to the nest and sing nearby while the female's incubating, in order to kind of like keep an eye on things and perhaps give a warning. So I studied song sparrows and looked for their nests, and I found that the male was always singing in a tree where he would be able to see where the nest was. It wasn't always adjacent to it. It could be 20 meters away. But my guess is ovenbird males probably do something similar.
Oh, and one person said that they did they flushed one as you described, and they saw the nest, and it was really interesting. So When do you think they sleep?
I actually think they mostly sleep during that period of the night, and they kind of like wake up and sing one of those flight songs. But I actually think they're also moving around a little bit. So in the few species where people have radio tracked them at night, and that sing like ovenbirds do at night, the females are actually, when they're fertile, like they sneak off their territory in the night and mate with birds next door. So despite the fact that we have these social pairs where they raised young together, there's usually extra pair young in the nest that don't belong to that male who's looking after them. So they sleep at night. I think they just wake up and sing one of those songs and are like, hey, I'm over here in case anybody's looking.
Okay, well, I think that's all we have for questions. So thanks again, Jen. That was very
so much.
We definitely really appreciate you presenting here this evening. It's great to learn about some of the local research that's going on.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to joining in person next year.
Oh, and yeah, it should be really good. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ian Shanahan. Ian is a board member with OFO. I've never actually met Ian, so I don't know a ton about his background and everything. I'll let him maybe give a little introduction to himself, but he's a fantastic speaker. So take it away, Ian.
Well, thank you so much, Carter. You're very kind. And hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us here this evening. It's incredible how quickly May has just flown by here. And yes, hopefully we will have the opportunity to be able to meet in person soon. So I'm just going to share my screen, so just stand by, and then we shall begin. So here we are. This is in fact the only mourning warbler that I've actually seen this year. It's been a bit of a strange migration in southeastern Ontario, but that's what June is for, I suppose, and June is fast upon us. I must admit, I've never actually been to Sault Ste. Marie. I was born and bred in Brighton, Ontario, and I've recently moved back there with my family, and I have always been very curious about Sault Ste. Marie, particularly so with this issue of OFO News. I served a 2-year term as the co-editor of OFO News alongside Paul Nicholson, and Ken McElrick wrote this incredibly informative but also very inspiring article about birding where the north begins and all about birding in Sault Ste. Marie, and that really piqued my interest. And since that time, that was actually, I've labeled that incorrectly. That was June of 2017. Ever since that time, I've really been interested in getting up to Sault Ste. Marie, and I hope that time can come soon. But for now, we will go with the virtual approach. Just before we jump into the presentation, I would just like to acknowledge that where I am located is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga people. This is area covered by the Williams Treaty. So we're going to start by doing a bit of an envisioning exercise. So I would like you to imagine that you are in a pine forest. And I know not all pine forests are created equal, and that's part of the beauty of nature and diversity of habitats. But generally speaking, imagine that you're in a forest with lots of pine trees, particularly red pine as we see here, as well as white pine. And you're walking along, and I think for me one of the most significant factors in a pine forest is the scent. I mean, the scent of pine trees is so nice that we artificially put it inside of our cars. So imagine that you are taking in the scent of the pine forest and you're wandering along, and maybe you're walking on some uneven terrain, so you're looking at the ground a lot. Lots of roots that you want to make sure you don't trip over, but among some of those roots, you see some late spring pine forest flowers like this blue bead lily, Clintonia. It's something that you can see in bloom right now in many pine forests in this part of the world. Another one, a personal favorite, twin flower, a small shrub that grows quite close to the ground in the herb layer. Again, very common in pine forests. So you're continuing to walk along and you're taking in the scent of the pine forest, and you see some fringed polygula or gaywings, another common species blooming right now in the pine forests. One that's typically a showstopper. Maybe somebody is stopping to take a photograph of it. Pink lady slipper. Another personal favorite, Pipsissewa or Prince's Pine. And then on the topic of scents, not just the scent of pine, but also the scent of wintergreen. And you might even reach down and pick one of the wintergreen berries and get a sense of what a pine forest tastes like. In the case of wintergreen, it tastes like Colgate toothpaste, FYI. And it is edible. You're not going to get sick. So if you find yourself in a pine forest, find some wintergreen. Pick the berries, smell the scent. You'll see where that wintergreen scent comes from. Ah, what is this that we hear? So two species that you can find in a pine forest. The first one, a pine warbler, very aptly named. There are a lot of warbler names that are not particularly descriptive of the bird, but the pine warbler is an exception to that, thankfully. They are very much tied to pine trees, including in migration when things are often a bit of a mishmash in terms of where you find birds. So the pine warbler, and then the second song was the chipping sparrow, a really nice comparison between the pine warbler and the chipping sparrow. And especially at this time of the year where the breeding season is very, very much underway, pine warbler is one of the earliest arrivals on the breeding scene. You are hearing lots of pine warblers and probably a good number of chipping sparrows in pine forests. While you are trying to not trip on roots and you're looking down at wildflowers and shrubs like these, maybe you're tasting a wintergreen berry and you're smelling wintergreen as well as the scent of pines.
Sorry, Ian. People are not able to hear the bird songs.
Ah, well, that could be a bit of a problem with a bird song presentation. Here, I will just do the classic unplug and plug back in. So I will stop share and start share again. Thank you for letting me know.
If you just click that button that says share computer sound when you're sharing your screen, that makes a difference. Yeah.
I suppose it wouldn't be a proper Zoom call without a Zoom faux pas, which 2020 and 2021 have been so known for. All right, take two. So again, at first we had the pine warbler, and then second, the chipping sparrow. So altogether, what I would like to bestow upon you this evening is this concept that learning bird songs can be very much a holistic experience, where you're using all of your senses. You're not just using your ears, you're using your eyes, you're using your nose. Sometimes you might even be using your sense of taste, depending on if you're into things like foraging. This is a presentation I've done various variations of over the past couple of years, and I'm very pleased to be joining you as part of the Sault Ste. Marie Birding Festival this evening. And as I mentioned before, hopefully we will get a chance to do this in person very soon. Just a quick logistical note, the majority of the photos in this presentation are in fact not by me. They're by a good friend and colleague, Andrea Kingsley, also lives here in Brighton. Just to be a bit more specific, I should note all the good photos are by Andrea Kingsley. I have a completely mediocre camera, and I have quite a common habit of taking bad photos of really neat birds. So I thought I would share just a couple quick examples of that before we jump back into the bird song. So, bad photos of neat birds number 1. This is a Hudsonian godwit. You would never be able to tell based on the photo, but take my word for it, yes it is. And then one of my all-time favorite bad photos of neat birds number 2 is this Kentucky warbler. And this actually could have been at least a 5 out of 10 photo, but you can see the out of focus branch going right through and in front of the bird's head. So there you have it. That's a typical photo from me, so that's why I asked Andrea to provide many of the photos. So thank you to Andrea in advance for doing that. A lot of the content of this presentation is contained in an article that Mike Cadman and myself co-wrote for last year's June issue of OFO News in praise of birdsong, and this was written to prepare for the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, which of course is well underway right now, and hopefully people are out in the field enjoying that and looking for fledged young and birds carrying food and all the rest. One of the big focus areas in that article, as well as in this presentation this evening, is the concept of learning through filters. Another way that sometimes people characterize this is chunking, and this is a fairly common teaching or pedagogical tool, chunking things into related groups. By no means is this revolutionary. It's not an Ian idea, but it is a strategy that has worked for a very, very long time for many people. One of the chunks that we are going to look at is the habitat chunk, and I really first came to this through the Algonquin Park series of nature books. And I used to work at Algonquin Park. I spent 4 summers there and spent time filling in to organize their educational program. And they have this wonderful series of books that the Friends of Algonquin, their partner organization, puts out. And it's really the everything of Algonquin Park, the birds of Algonquin, the mammals of Algonquin, the wildflowers, and so on and so forth. And this is a recent reprint. But the way that the majority of these books are organized is by habitat. You know, what birds do you find in a coniferous forest? What birds do you find in a deciduous forest, a shoreline, a lake, etc.? And that was really a game changer for me, this concept of not thinking based on the field guide, not thinking taxonomically, but thinking about where you are, context, which really makes sense because when you are birding, you are in a habitat. You might be on the edge of 2 habitats. In fact, that's generally where the best birding is, but the context is really important, and that all fits into this idea of a holistic approach to birding. I don't work for Algonquin now, so I'm not getting any sort of commission or anything by mentioning these books, but they're great. I highly recommend them, and again, they are organized by habitat. So habitat, well, what is a habitat? I mean, it's food, water, shelter, and space. Those are the basics. There isn't really a right or wrong answer to what the definitions of specific habitats are, because the word habitat, by definition, is from the perspective of a species. So if you're talking about an ovenbird, for example, you know, what is its habitat? It has very, very specific requirements. Every species has very specific requirements, you know, types of plants, insects that are there, amount of space, amount of sunlight, moisture, proximity to other features. But just to kind of simplify this, I thought I would break it down into 6 fairly workable habitat chunks. So deciduous forest, marsh, shoreline, field or field edge or meadow edge, lake, and coniferous forest. And again, this is not exhaustive, and each habitat is specific to each species, but this is a good starting point. And we're going to spend most of our time focusing on the various wetlands and the types of forests. So let's start in a marsh. Most people can get fairly ready access to a marsh. And a good starting point when learning bird songs is, what are the birds that you typically see in a particular habitat? And in a marsh, because visibility tends to be a lot easier because you don't have a canopy of trees, the visibility is great. So what do we typically see in a marsh? Well, common yellowthroat. Most of them are on territory now. What else do we see in a marsh? American bitterns. Maybe not always see them as well as we would like. Sometimes they're just flying by, or we might get lucky and see them despite the fact that they're camouflaging. As the name would suggest, marsh wren, yes, also found often in a marsh. Swamp sparrow, maybe not as well named as it could be. They're more often in marshes than swamps, but occasionally in swamps as well. So when you go to a marsh and these are the birds you see, try to learn the songs of those birds next. And we will come back to these songs a little bit later in the presentation. If the wetland that you're in has more standing trees, standing shrubs, often dead trees and shrubs like this one here, it's maybe trending more into the swamp direction, in which case you might have species like this tree swallow. I actually took this photo this morning, and you can see it's not an award-winning photo, not an Andrea photo, but this was a nice little opportunity to take a picture this morning. Eastern kingbird, another one that you're often seeing on standing dead trees in swamps, and green herons. So depending on the type of wetland you're in, you have a different cast of characters. And if beavers are involved, that habitat might change in fairly short order. So habitats are dynamic, which always keeps it enjoyable. Some of the terminology that we're going to dig into, in addition to our examination of different habitats, there are many terms that we could look at. I'm only going to focus on a small number here because we don't have a huge amount of time. So we're going to talk about pitch. Pitch, not to be confused with what baseball pitchers do. Pitch is just very simply how high or low a sound is. So as we get older, as we grow up through childhood, our voices move from high-pitched to low-pitched. I actually had a very high-pitched voice, such that whenever I picked up the phone for a period of time, people would say, "Hello, Catherine," my mother's name. And then in a very short period of time, it switched to, "Oh, hello, Don," my father's name. So yes, my voice dropped quite a lot in a very short period of time. So we'll talk a bit about pitch. We will also talk about tone, the tone of voice. What kind of emotion are you suggesting with your voice? We can tell if somebody is happy or sad or sarcastic based on the tone of voice. Now, birds, most of them do not have the emotional complexity to have those types of emotions, but we can apply what we know of human emotions to the sounds that we hear of birds. You see the Baltimore Oriole on the right. To the human ear, they sound quite happy. Now, again, anthropomorphizing. Are they happy? I don't know. Some birds are more emotionally complex than others, but probably Baltimore Orioles are not happy in the way that we think about it, but it's a sound that sounds happy in human terms. So tone can be very helpful. Now we get into some music terms, and if there are any musicians out there, you will know these. Staccato. So staccato is something like each note is separated. It's not connected to anything else, and we will look at some examples of this. The opposite of that is legato, where the notes are connected. And again, we will look at some examples of legato. On the topic of legato, we get to warble, which is not what most of our warblers do. Some of them, but not most of them. It's more the old world warblers in Eurasia and Africa that warble. Similar to warble, a trill. One of the best examples of a bird that trills is the pine warbler. We've already heard that this evening, and we will hear that again. So that's some basic terminology. We will go through all of this with some examples, but I won't overburden you with any additional terminology. Another useful thing to look at when examining bird songs is different parts. And for this, we're actually going to go down to Nashville, Tennessee. We're going to go to Nashville and Tennessee warblers, which have nothing to do with Nashville and Tennessee. They go past Nashville, the capital city of Tennessee. Actually, I think it's the capital city. It's a city in Tennessee. I don't actually know if it's the capital. Should have checked that. Yes, they have nothing really to do with Nashville and Tennessee. They really should be called Spruce Warbler 1 and Spruce Warbler 2. That might be a bit more appropriate, although Nashville Warbler is a bit more of a habitat generalist. But this is a really nice comparison because the Nashville Warbler has a pretty distinctly two-parted song, and there are different ways that you can define the part of a song. Really, you can tell that a song has moved to a different part when something about it pretty significantly changes. Maybe it's the pitch, maybe it's the tone, maybe it's the speed, maybe it's the volume. It could be really anything that significantly changes. And the Nashville warbler is a great example of a bird that just has the perfect two-parted song. And I'm just going to show you an example. I did have a sound recording, but it wasn't very good, so I'm going to play the one from the Sibley app and just put it up to the microphone. So as I say, that's a really good example of a two-parted song. The first part, a little bit slower. The second part, much faster. It's almost like a motorcycle engine that goes into a second gear. So that's a two-parted song. Nashville warbler, typically found in mixed coniferous forests, but they are quite a habitat generalist. That's why they were extremely common on the last breeding bird atlas. Less of a habitat generalist, the Tennessee warbler. They're a boreal forest spruce tree nester, and they have a pretty distinctly three-parted song. Also, that's that sort of idea of a motorcycle revving up and going into different gears. So let's give this one a listen. So 3 different gears, a little slow, then fast, then a little bit faster, or revving its engines up. Great example of a three-parted song with the Tennessee warbler. Let's now move to another type of song pattern, rising, falling, or flat. Now, what do we mean by that? More specifically, we could look at speed, pitch, and volume. Does a song get faster? It could be rising in speed. Does it get slower? Then it would be falling in speed. Or does the speed stay the same from start to finish? In which case, it would be flat. What about pitch? Does it get higher? In that case, it would be rising. If it gets lower progressively, it would be falling. Or again, if it stays the same, it would be flat. And then volume. If it gets louder from start to finish, it's rising, quieter, falling, and flat. So the veery is a classic example of a song pattern that is falling in pitch. Let's give it a listen. Where can you find veeries? Typically in hardwood forests with lots of beeches and maples. So think about other things that you see in a beech or maple forest. What plants do you see on the forest floor? That's your context. And this is what you might hear, as I heard this morning when I was doing field work.
Ian, I cannot hear that. This is Lynn speaking.
Anyone else able to hear that? Or not able to hear that?
No, I didn't hear it either.
Really?
I heard the last one, the Nashville warbler and Tennessee warbler, but
Okay. Well, this is why having a backup is good. So I do have my Sibley app here, so I will just go to the veery on the Sibley app. Could everyone hear the pine warbler at the start?
Well, I couldn't hear the pine warbler.
Really? Because I did select play computer sound, but I guess it chose not to. All right, that's okay. Let me just get the veery on here. Could everyone hear that one okay?
I could hear that.
All right, good stuff. So falling in pitch, if you were playing notes on a piano, you would be going to your left. A species that is rising in pitch, the northern parula. Usually parulas, in terms of context, in the breeding season, they're in the tops of trees. I was very lucky to see this very tired one in migration, quite low to the ground, which is why I was able to actually sketch it. Never thought I would be able to sketch a parula, as they are tree toppers, typically in the tops of spruce trees. Very difficult to see, especially being such a small warbler. So rather than falling in pitch, the notes getting lower, the notes with a parula song get higher. So let's give the parula a listen. Again, I'll just pull this up on the Sibley app. So rising in pitch, almost like it's rising in intensity as well. And then a species that rises in volume, we've just talked about this one, the ovenbird. Now, I've got a video. The sound is probably not going to work, but I will play the song here on the Sibley app. So the ovenbird song doesn't always rise in volume. The first couple ones that we listened to pretty well stayed flat in terms of volume, but oftentimes it does increase in volume, and you can see that represented on the spectrograms as well, as we saw in the last presentation. So speaking of spectrograms, they can be very useful, especially when you are trying to determine if a bird song is more on the staccato side or on the legato side. There's a free app that you can get. It's called Spectral View. It's SPECTRAL and then View. And you can just download this, and it records songs and provides you with the spectrogram imaging, which is really, really useful, especially when comparing staccato and legato. So we'll get back to our Tennessee warbler here. Super staccato sound. It's almost like parts of a sewing machine. And you can see it, again, in coniferous forests. And there you can see it represented on the spectrogram. Just play it again in the Sibley app as a comparison point. Especially at the beginning in the slower part, you can really see the separation between the different notes represented by these warmly colored lines at the beginning and as well in the middle part. Where the different notes get really close together, you can see that represented here on the right-hand side of the first song burst, and it's a little more difficult to see each individual staccato note, but for the most part, each note is quite separate. Compare that to something like a warbling vireo, which interestingly enough also visually looks quite similar to a Tennessee warbler. Nests in totally different habitat. Often find them more in shoreline type zones, particularly nesting in trees like eastern cottonwoods or perhaps in willows. And they're the opposite of the staccato, the very sharp separated notes. The notes are more connected. So I'll just pull the warbling vireo up on the Sibley app, and you can see on the spectrogram there, you can see that there aren't those sharp separated lines as there was with the Tennessee warbler with its very staccato sound. So here is warbling vireo. So everything kind of sewn together and connected lazily in the case of the warbling vireo. And that's perfect because many legato sounds, in fact, are warbles. And I mentioned earlier, a lot of our warblers don't warble, but we stole the name from an old world, several families of old world warblers. So yes, the warbling vireo is not a warbler, but it is a vireo that warbles. What's in a name? Other warblers that aren't actually wood warblers, rose-breasted grosbeak. Rose-breasted grosbeak has a really nice warbling song. They're also very easy to sketch because they just sit there up in trees. Let's give a listen to our red-eyed vireo song, and you get another nice example of a warble where the songs or the sounds are all connected together. Certainly not the sharp, separated notes of the Tennessee warbler. And again, keeping our holistic, context-based view in mind. What is the context for a rose-breasted grosbeak? Probably a hardwood forest, and to be a bit more specific, because again, species have very unique habitat requirements, probably a semi-open area in a hardwood forest. They tend to be in areas with lots of sun. So you might have to put sunscreen on with rose-breasted grosbeaks. And thinking about all your senses, maybe you are smelling the scent of sunscreen while hearing a rose-breasted grosbeak and feeling the sun on your eyes and putting on your sunglasses. Bring all your senses into it for the full experience. Similar to warbles are trills. Now, what's different between a warble and a trill? A warble has many different notes. Goes up and down and around and all over the place, like in a warbling vireo song, like in a rose-breasted grosbeak song. A trill stays on the same note. It's kind of like an opera singer that just goes, oh, and they just stay on the note. Pine warbler is kind of like the opera singer of the warblers. Even though they don't warble, they trill. It should be the pine triller if they wanted to properly name it. So let's go back to the pine warbler song, since you were not able to hear it earlier. We will hear it now for the first time. So it just stays on the same note that it kind of repeats in a modulating fashion. And earlier we talked about rising, falling, flat. This one definitely flat. Sometimes, depending on the song type that a pine warbler is delivering, it might rise in pitch, it might fall in pitch, it might rise in volume, but typically fairly flat. And again, in those pine forests with wintergreen and the scent of pines, and wintergreen berries and yellow or pink lady slippers, probably yellow lady slippers too, more in sandy type soil. Lastly, we're going to move to sound quality. Quality is an area where we get a bit more into the anthropomorphizing because we can sort of apply human emotions. So again, some birds have more emotional and intelligence complexity than others. But that doesn't mean that we can't apply human emotions in the learning process. If it helps you to think of a Baltimore Orioles song as happy, great, go with it. You're not saying that the Baltimore Oriole is happy, you're not being unscientific, you're just using something that works for you for your own learning, for your own experience, and that's totally fine. Baltimore Oriole sounds quite happy. Rose-breasted grosbeak also sounds fairly cheery. Scarlet tanager, not so much. If a scarlet tanager were applied to human emotions, they might sound grumpy, or as it was very famously described by Roger Tory Peterson, like a robin with a sore throat. Let's give a listen to our scarlet tanager, our robin with a sore throat. This is another one in hardwood forests dominated by beech and maple trees. You're probably seeing things like sarsaparilla growing on the ground. And in early spring, when the first few tanagers arrive, you might be seeing things like white and red trillium, large-flowered bellwort, some of the beautiful spring ephemeral wildflowers. Again, think of the context, think of the big picture. It enriches the experience. And here we go with tanager. So you can hear those sort of burry or harsh sounds within the song of the scarlet tanager that gives it this sense that it's maybe somewhat grumpy or that it has a sore throat. Of course, no, it doesn't actually have a sore throat. It's probably not grumpy, although this one that I sketched was very tired. It had just arrived. If it helps you remember it, great. Go with it. And just briefly again, we talked about quality with the rose-breasted grosbeak. In comparison to the scarlet tanager, they have a cheery quality. And to bring in Roger Tory Peterson and a quotation from him again, they were famously described by him as sounding like a robin that had music lessons. So much more melodic and refined sounding in quality than the scarlet tanager, which was a bit rougher. So it is now time to apply, and we're going to go back into a wetland, specifically a marsh, where you were seeing some of the marsh species that we looked at before. This is not an exhaustive list, but we'll just go through each of these four. And rather than sort of focusing on what song is for each bird, let's focus on some of the things that we've talked about. What is the quality? How many parts do we have? So we'll start with the common yellowthroat on the left-hand side there. This is a great one because, as the name would suggest, they're very common. You can find them in most marshes. So in terms of rising and falling, it does both. It goes up and down and up and down and up and down, and they're quite famous for that. In terms of quality, maybe more on the cheery side, and you can get very creative with this. You can say it sounds sardonic, but it's easier just to go with kind of happy, sad, start simple like that. So yes, they have a bit of a cheery sound to the human ear. Rising and falling, staccato or legato, definitely more on the legato side. The notes all connected together, not sharp and separated like with the Tennessee warbler. And it fits more into the category of a warble. So a warbler, not called a warbler, that actually warbles. These names. We need to do something about the names, don't we? Moving along to the swamp sparrow. Speaking of poor bird names, swamp sparrow, more often found in marshes. Let's give a listen to the swamp sparrow song. So rising, falling, or flat, very flat. Flat as a board, flat as a pancake, the swamp sparrow, as flat as the top of the cattails in the marsh. Quality, instead of applying human emotions, you might compare it to something non-human, like mechanical sound. Has a sewing machine sound to it, certainly to my ear. And if you think, what, Ian, you're crazy, it doesn't sound like a sewing machine, that's okay. There's no right or wrong answer to this. It's totally subjective. It's whatever works for you. To my ear, sounds kind of mechanical, like a sewing machine. very flat, no rising and falling like with the common yellowthroat, more on the staccato side. You can hear the separate notes. Moving along to just below the swamp sparrow, we have the marsh wren. This is a fun one. The marsh wren, Carter mentioned that he just had his first marsh wrens, I believe, today or a day or two ago. So yes, they are finding their way into their territories to build all their proper nests and dummy nests, as marsh wrens are wont to do, to thwart their predators. This is one of the most memorable songs of the marsh. Here we go. So this is a good one for comparing parts. Generally speaking, there's a lot of variation, but generally speaking, you've got two parts, kind of like a Nashville warbler. The slower, higher part at the beginning, and then the faster, lower pitched part second. In terms of quality, again, more on the mechanical side, like a swamp sparrow, less so on the sort of cheery human emotion side. It's kind of like a trill. Some people describe it as a rattle. In fact, some people compare it to those rattles that sometimes people have during New Year's parties. Yes, remember when we got to do those in person? Soon, 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 it's coming. And then I thought we would finish off with one of the most unique and memorable songs of the marsh, particularly cattail marshes, the American Bittern. It's almost weird calling it a song. It's more like an experience, hearing an American Bittern. So here we go. So quality. This is a tough one. Does it sound happy? Does it sound sad? Does it sound mechanical? None of those really fit. And again, you just use whatever works for you. To me, it kind of sounds like an air pump. It sounds like someone's using an air pump. It's not mechanical per se, but it's a synthetic type sound. It goes up and down a bit, but everything is in that very low range. It's not a trill. It's not a warbler, not a warble. It's totally, totally unique. And you might not apply any of what we've talked about in this presentation. You might just apply whatever works best for you while keeping in mind the broader context. You might have heard the marsh wrens singing in the background of that sound clip. And I would say if you go to your nearest marsh right now, there's a good chance, especially if it's a cattail marsh, there's a good chance you can hear at least two, maybe three, maybe four, all four of these species, as well as many others. You're seeing plants like broad-leaved and narrow-leaved cattail, other marsh plants like duckweed or European frogbit coming up. If you've got shrubby areas in your marsh, you might have things like red osier or dogwood. Frogs are probably calling. Don't forget about other animals outside of birds. Of course, there's not a lot of shade in a marsh, so I hope you have a hat and some sunscreen, maybe some water. All of these things help. It all helps paint the big picture. Keep the context in mind. Keep some of the terminologies and tips. Do what works best for you. And the advice that my father gave me that I still carry with me whenever I go out birding, look for birds with your ears. It makes for a very enriching experience, very enjoyable, and I wish you all the very best of luck with your ear birding. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ian. That was really good. Really good presentation.
Thanks, Carter. Sorry about the sound goof ups. I should know better since I use Zoom on a weekly basis, but
that's okay. It worked out with the phone.
There it is.
That was good.
Having a plan B is always a good thing.
Yeah.
The Sibley app is great. Be happy to take any questions.
Yeah. The first question is, what is the difference between a swamp and a marsh?
Yeah, so we have this great habit as humans of putting everything in these little boxes, and nature doesn't always fit into boxes. But typically, a swamp has more standing trees and shrubs, many of which die, which creates habitat for things like the tree swallows, like we saw earlier. Marshes tend to be more with herbaceous species like cattails and wild rice and so on. So yeah, it's a really good question, and you get into other types of wetlands, and there's lots of gray area, as there is in nature. It's all plenty of gray.
Yeah, you get, fens and bogs,
Yeah.
and all that. Yeah, it
Yeah.
becomes
What's the pH?
yeah. um, Going through here, lots of thank yous, and that was awesome. In the chat here. Oh, I missed
Thank
the name
you.
of the app. You mentioned an app.
Oh yeah, it's Spectral View. SPECTRAL View, VIEW. I always make sure when I'm spelling something out that I don't say it at warp speed as most people do on the phone. Pet peeve. BVTCD. Goodbye. Thanks. You're like, whoa, wait. Yeah, Spectral View is it's great. It was a free app, and it records and paints your spectrograms as you're listening, which is really great, really useful.
Right. Any other questions for Ian? Oh, someone's getting better at seeing with their ears.
Good stuff. There's a neat book called The Singing Life of Birds. The author's name escapes me, but the Singing Life of Birds, and he says that he has a really great ability to visualize the songs. He says, he admits right in the introduction that his ears aren't great, but he can see the pattern of the songs. He can basically see the spectrograms in his mind, which really helps. And with eBird now, just make a recording of a bird on your phone, upload the recording to eBird, it automatically creates the spectrogram, which is really cool. Now, fun fact, mockingbirds, when I lived in Toronto and there are lots of mockingbirds, record a mockingbird mimicking another bird, which of course they do plenty of, often in rapid succession, and upload the spectrogram, and then compare it to the real spectrogram of the real bird. It's crazy. It's exactly the same.
Oh, really?
It's a
Funny,
fun
funny,
little.
funny story.
Yeah.
The only time I've been really in the South was I went to Cuba for a week, and the first morning we were there, I'm like, oh, there's a northern cardinal singing, and I open up my field guide that I bought for Cuba birds, and no northern cardinal. Northern cardinals aren't in Cuba. I'm like, it was a mockingbird, which is abundant in Cuba. I'm like, it must have been a migratory bird that went up to Florida. And I thought that was really interesting, that I for sure thought I heard a cardinal singing, but it was a mockingbird.
Yeah, so basically everything I've talked about in this presentation is totally void if there are mockingbirds around.
Oh, I've been
the takeaway.
Even starlings too. I've been in places where I've heard
big time
an eastern meadowlark singing where I shouldn't be hearing an eastern meadowlark. It's like, oh, yeah. Meadowlark here. I'm like, oh no, it's the starlings over there.
Yeah, starlings are underrated for their mimicking abilities. I've heard them do bluebirds and all kinds of crazy things.
The ones around my house really like doing killdeers.
Yeah, that's a popular one for sure. Yeah.
I find BirdNet does a good job too with the spectrogram. Are there any other apps to help with bird identification through sound?
Yeah, I mean that's a great one. I always go back to the Sibley app just because you've got the bird songs right there as a comparison. In terms of automatically identifying them, somebody just showed me a program and I didn't get the name of it. I can find out and send it to Carter, and if you want to send it out in a follow-up or anything, I think it was designed just for the Atlas to basically identify everything that's out there. So I will get the name of that for sure.
Like the Merlin app is introducing audio version of their ID as well, in addition to
I heard.
I think it's only in beta testing right now, but that means it should be out in the near future. And apparently it works even better than BirdNet based on what I've been told. So,
Okay.
But yeah.
This is promising.
All right, one last call for questions here. And seeing as there is none, okay, thanks again, Ian. That was
Thank you.
Fantastic. We definitely appreciate you coming out and doing this for us.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure, and I would love to be able to get to Sault Ste. Marie in person someday and get to meet some of you folks, and very thankful for programs like Zoom to allow us to connect in the meantime. And thank you to all the organizers, Carter and Lynn, and fellow presenter Jen, and certainly learned a lot about those interesting nocturnal songs of ovenbirds, which has always been a source of fascination. So a great pleasure to be here, and look forward to whatever happens down the road.
All right. So, and then now to wrap things up, this is the end of the festival. So thanks to everyone who participated all throughout the weekend. Hopefully everyone learned a lot. I think we made it the best that we could, making it virtual. So another reminder that we've got about 1 hour left in the auction. All money raised goes to bird conservation, so don't be afraid. There's some good items there. I will go and grab the link again here. And 1 second here. I just gotta grab the link. So I just put the link into the chat. So make sure you go check that out. Bidding ends at 9:30 p.m. Eastern time this evening. So go ahead and do that. Reminder that for best bird and best bird photograph, get your entries submitted. And I think that's everything. So thanks again, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thanks, Carter. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Carter, especially for making this happen. And next year in person in Sault Ste. Marie.
For sure, yeah.
Okay,
Sure.
for now.